This is Twit.
Yeah, we were just talking about whether some behavior was the fault of sort of line employees or leadership. And there's another well-known instance that's been in the news and even in movies that asks some of those same questions. We had an article this week about lessons security leaders can learn from Theranos. Now, remember Theranos? They were that great company that was going to be able to very quickly run an entire panel of disease-seeking tests on a single drop of blood. And in a new HBO documentary called The Inventor, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley, all of us get to see the very cautionary tale of Elizabeth Holmes, the young entrepreneur who dropped out of Stanford at the age of 19 to start Theranos. The company was going to disrupt this $36 billion industry, and it turned out to be massive fraud. So how did this happen? How did so many very smart people help this happen? Well, the writer of the article says that there are three big lessons that people who are executives, and especially those in IT and security, can learn. First, know your silos. You know, we hear a lot about breaking down silos and getting teams to work together, but know where your silos are. In the case of Theranos, the engineering teams that were supposed to be building this magical thing were physically and literally as separate as possible from the rest of the company. So make sure that your silos, if they must exist, are there for a very concrete and, I would add, legal reason. And if you don't want the silos in place, put some incentives in place to get people on different teams to talk to one another. Now, next is beware of false positives. So in the case of Theranos, they were telling consumers that they could just go ahead and prescribe their own tests and find out about all kinds of things that could be happening in their blood. That's probably not the best of ideas, because so many of those results need to be interpreted by someone who has a clue that didn't come from a Google search, of what those results mean. So beware of systems, processes, and technology that give you false positives. And finally, allow for dissent. Always beware of being in or creating a culture where the only responsible and allowable contribution to a discussion is to agree with what the boss is saying. Now, ultimately, someone has to make a decision, and the entire team needs to get around that. But there should always be good discussion, pardon me for a second, and very vibrant discussion about the pros and cons of whatever course of action is being considered, the pros and cons of whatever is being built and whether it's succeeding. So create that culture so that you know you will hear honestly whether someone agrees with you or not. And those employees know that they'll be able to dissent without it having a huge impact on their career potential. Lou, I want to bring you into this because you manage people. You have a culture for your team, and you work within a larger culture. So what do you think? Was the culture there at Theranos sort of uniquely toxic, or are there a lot of companies that could find themselves in this same boat because of the culture?
That's a great question, because there are a lot of companies that are in this boat. I mean, think about it. Apple, back in the years of Steve Jobs, the whole concept of silos was there. Even in today's business, they still have had problems getting into the services business because of that. I mean, even Microsoft had the silo problem, which is, now that, new CEOs come in, he's changed the culture. It's definitely altered that. I think we're better business because of it. Another thing, kind of knowing your silos is important, because you got to know where you need to actually improve on and know where you actually have to make more cohesion within your business. It's really important. I think false positive one's really interesting too, because a lot of businesses out there today are trying to be more agile. And so in order to be agile, you have to be reactive. And sometimes you react on things that might be a false positive, like a one kind of incident or isolated scenario. And so that it becomes a hard thing to root through. And I think that's where more data will help. The biggest thing, the last thing you talked about culture, and making sure that everyone's voice is heard. We've been trained. We train our employees, even at Microsoft, about what we call crucial conversations, and these are things of making sure everyone's voice is heard, because everyone has an interesting and very valuable point of view, no matter if it's not yours or it's one that you agree on or not. And it really does help businesses break down barriers. And I think it's interesting because it sounds kind of like fluffy in a sense, but the truth of the matter is it does really help, and it makes you shift your business in the right direction. I think all of these are super valuable, and they're definitely not particular to this business.
I agree with you, and I think it's fascinating to watch those cultures in action. Heather, I want to turn to you, because you and I share something in that we both work day to day in an environment where our office doesn't put us in a cubicle next to a lot of our coworkers. And what have you seen about the way this culture can be built to involve people who aren't, sitting around the corporate lunch table with fellow employees on a day-to-day basis?
Well, now that's an interesting take, because I was actually looking at this, and by the way, this is a great bite. I love this entire topic. I was actually looking at it a little bit differently, but in terms of, when you become a telecommuter, or when all of your closest colleagues are not even in the same time zone, and sometimes not even on the same continent, there can be challenges to creating like the esprit de corps, but just being able to reach out and the hallway conversations where so much insight is gleaned, that takes more effort. I'm going to take a step back though and question whether siloing it was really part of the problem in this case, because it's not that nobody was questioning it. It's that it was outside people were questioning it. In fact, doctors were saying, like, medically, this is impossible what you're trying to do. It's just that she did a great job of covering up their input and not passing it along. So I think that definitely this is a case of the fish rots from the head. And I think that one of the things that brings this more to the front, because we're all used to, there's been an unfortunate number of Ponzi schemes over the last 2 decades that we could probably just, Enron, everybody else, that this could be just one more story. I think that one of the reasons this hits so hard is that this isn't just another technology story that we're talking about. It's hard to get your head wrapped around. This is medical. This is people's biology. This is really important. And I think one of the comments that you made earlier about getting someone who knows what they're talking about to interpret is really important, because a lot of people don't understand, but medical results, I can give you a number associated with a parameter like a CBC, but it could mean different things depending on the type of lab, where the lab is, how they ran that test, and having a trained medical person to actually be able to tell you, well, this number was 10, but another lab, 10 would be normal, but with this lab, they skew a little bit differently because of the way they treat some of those parameters. I think all of that's really important. And by the way, just so y'all know, I used to teach AP biology, so this is something that I know it's hard to believe, but it's one of those things that it hits home. I can't go to WebMD without coming back with a diagnosis of toe cancer. I don't care what my symptoms were. So if you're handing out just an over-the-counter fairly difficult type of blood test, and then you want somebody to take that away and have something meaningful, whether it was run legitimately or not, and in this case they weren't being run legitimately. I think it's incredibly difficult to be able to interpret these things so that they're meaningful. I used to tell my students, if you do a problem and you don't include the units after the end of it, you haven't done science, you've done math. And in this case, these tests were, math that were calculated incorrectly, but they were still just math because there was no meaning behind any of the units that were being provided.
That's a great point. There are all kinds of lessons we can draw from this. And to me, one of them is that it's critical for both individual employees and the culture of the organization not to allow anyone to be intimidated by the founder. I have worked with a lot of really bright people. I have interviewed a lot of really bright people. And you can't let the fact that you're dealing with a really bright person keep you from saying, in this instance, I don't see how you're right. Walk me through this using small words and short sentences. Convince me that you're right. And if you can't say that, then there's a bad culture going on. If you're at the top, if you see that going on, don't let it stroke your ego, let it stroke your paranoia, because it means that your organization is setting itself up for some really huge problems down the line.